All living things are connected. From the smallest and most simple to the largest and most complex. Every living thing needs energy to survive. So where does that energy come from? Energy is passed from one organism to another, connecting living things like links in a chain. In this case, a food chain. All living things depend on each other because all living things have a place in the food chain. Food chains are an essential component of every ecosystem. Of course, a food chain is not a literal chain. It's just how we describe the relationships between organisms. Picturing a chain just makes it easier to see and understand the energy flow between living things. Every living thing is part of a food chain, even humans. Most living things can be found in multiple chains. The food chain has a domino effect, as each organism affects another. So let's go through the links of the food chain, one step at a time. Starting with the work of the sun. Did you know that all the energy in all the Earth's food chains originate from the sun? The sun's energy reaches the Earth in the form of sunlight. Plants then use that heat and light, along with water and carbon dioxide, to make their own food. This process is called photosynthesis. Plants are called producers because they actually produce their own food. Every food chain must begin with a producer. So let's start our chain with grass as the first link. Animals cannot create their own food. They must find and consume their energy from other sources. This is why animals are called consumers. The second link in a food chain is composed of consumers whose diets consist of plants. These consumers are called herbivores. When an animal eats plants, some of the energy that the plant had made from the sun is transferred from the plant to the animal. The energy is then used for things like breathing, moving, and growing. An herbivore is called a primary consumer. The word primary means first, because an animal eating plants is the first consumer in the food chain. So let's add a rabbit as our first consumer and the second link to our food chain. Next comes a secondary consumer, which is the second consumer in the food chain. The second consumer is a carnivore and gets its energy by eating other animals. Maybe that rabbit from our second link will be eaten by a fox. When the fox eats the rabbit, part of the energy the rabbit got from eating the grass is transferred to the fox. This marks the end of a simple food chain. The grass grows, the rabbit eats the grass, then the fox eats the rabbit. So the energy from the sun was captured by the grass, then transferred to the rabbit, then transferred to the fox. Some food chains have more than just 3 levels, but there can't be too many links in the chain. Each animal in the food chain requires a lot of the energy from the previous level. Unfortunately, only about 10% of the energy consumed by an animal gets passed on to the next level. Let's look at a more extensive food chain. This time, let's make our primary consumer a grasshopper. So the grasshopper will eat the grass, then it will get eaten by a secondary producer, a bird. Then the bird gets eaten by a tertiary, or third level consumer, a snake. The snake is then eaten by a hawk. The hawk is the apex predator in this food chain. Apex means the highest point or the top. Apex predators are not hunted by any other animal. They are at the top of the food chain. I bet you can list off a number of apex predators. Animals like lions, sharks, wolves, bears, hawks, and crocodiles are all apex predators. Some might think because these animals aren't hunted that they don't contribute to the food chain. But that's not the case. When plants and animals die, they are broken down by decomposers. The most common decomposers are bacteria and fungi. They break down dead plants and animals into nutrients that the soil needs to grow all those plants from the beginning of the food chain. This is where the metaphor circle of life comes from. A network of interconnected food chains is called a food web. A healthy food web has an abundance of plants, many herbivores, and relatively few carnivores and omnivores. This balance helps the ecosystem maintain and recycle the total amount of organisms in a given area. Every link in a food web is connected to at least two others: what they eat and what eats them. A food chain outlines who eats whom. A food web is all the food chains in an ecosystem.